When you look back on the overall development of Assassin's Creed 3, fun times, stressful times?
It was an amazing experience. Like it was a huge amount of fun, and at the same time, probably the most stressful last year of my life. I think it was very intense. You know, we went for the brass ring on that one, and we tried to put everything in, make it monstrously large, make it the best game in the franchise. Really try to put everything out there. So it was a lot of work, but in any franchise, you know, there are games where you do huge amounts of tech development and games where you do content development, and ours was mostly a big tech reshuffle at the start. It's rewarding to see the franchise benefit from all that hard work as well. Like you see the naval stuff going into Black Flag, you know, them using all the new navigation and combat stuff. It's cool. And you know, at the time, you know, when we're trying to do as much as possible, you feel like it's the right shape. In retrospect, I think we probably should have gone for sort of 10-15% less, which would have given us more time at the end to iron out the kinks. I think the review version had the bugs, and by the time it actually came out for everyone else, we'd got rid of most of them. Yeah. But yeah, it's always the way. Ambition equals bugs most of the time.
But I assume you're still pretty proud of that project.
Oh, I'm super proud. You know, I'm proud of the guys. I'm proud of the game. It's still the #1 selling Ubisoft game of all time. It's actually interesting at the moment in that, you know, we're talking a lot about the role of women in games and, you know, gender equality in both the workplace and in how we present heroes. And I found it really interesting that one of the things we were most proud of, which was to have a minority hero, to use native language for the first time authentically in a game. I think no one would have heard, you know, that dialect before in a game, to have heroes who were so different and wasn't really reported. I think it was like one of our favorite things in the game, and I kind of wish it had got picked up a bit more.
You talk about how tough it was to keep the opening chapter under wraps.
It was super difficult because we were really excited, and I think in the end, I think a lot of people liked Hatham, you know, more than Connor, which is kind of cool. And it was really difficult to keep it under wraps, but at the same time, we had so much stuff to talk about. The only thing we in the end, I think we should have shortened it by about 20 minutes. That would have been the goal. I think there's learning in that in terms of time to fantasy. It's funny actually because I gave a GDC talk years ago on immediacy in games as one of the core pillars, and that one we kind of completely missed on the immediacy. It originally was meant to be like a surprise, you know, because we over communicate on games so much and everybody knows everything before we ship. So to have a surprise in there, it was just that little bit too long, and then I think it would have worked. But yeah, people love the character, and someone was saying the other day that the Hatham figurine always sells like gangbusters. The toy, yeah. So who knows? Yeah, maybe one day, maybe we'll get back there and do the Hatham game. It's a fascinating challenge, the idea of sort of structured narrative inside of a toy box, you know, and I think that's all kinds of open world games especially have been tackling that challenge. My personal preference and what we tried to do with Assassin's Creed 3 was say, for all the people who want to mainline the story, you know, there's always going to be an icon blinking, there's always going to be a clear path through the game. And for everyone else who wants to push at the boundaries a little, you can find all these other stories. You know, there were 60 homestead missions where you could build that out. There were about 20, you know, naval missions in the end that you could find. But we weren't going to push these in your face. You know, every district had its own little narrative with submissions and all that sort of stuff. And we wanted the sense of discovery. And what we learned was, and I don't know why. That's why I'm still moving around in my head a little bit. But players, I think, had got used to being spoon-fed the stuff, and so some people completely missed all the secondary content. You know, so there's a learning about how much you flag it to make you still feel like you discovered it, versus allowing it to remain hidden.
How do you know they missed it and just weren't interested in it?
It's a good question. It's tricky in some respects, but you can see we can see stats on engagement, so we can see what things were found. You could see it a lot in the reviews, in the most positive reviews, like the sort of 10 out of 10 reviews we got. They called out heavily all of the side content, you know, so they'd spent time with it, and I felt like the other side of the coin were people who rushed through the story were more frustrated. You know what I mean? Because they didn't engage with it. And so that's really tricky as well, because you're asking reviewers to behave like players, which is not always the same thing, because reviewers are on a deadline. They want to get to they want the credits to roll so they can write their article. So it's a completely different play pattern. You know, we see the same thing even play testing in the building. When it's not your save file, people play completely differently. They don't collect. They don't engage with things that are optional. You know, they just go down the middle. It's tricky to figure out whether, you know, they love it and don't have time, or they didn't like it at all, or, you know, all these sorts of things. But I think we just need to do a better job, especially of making sure they saw it.
Are you in the forums, like reading through and people are complaining about like the chase sequences, for example?
Yeah, well, I mean, pretty much everyone lurks, I think, in the various forums. At a certain point, you have to tune it out because otherwise you can't go anywhere. And you realize that the volume of sound generated by a lot of those sites as a percentage of the audience is not reflective of the actual audience. You know, a lot of the time people are on the money, and you wanna tackle it and get in there, and it's just a matter of can you. You know, so it's always feedback based on the assumption that everything is fixable and time is infinite, and neither of those things are true, unfortunately. So we wrapped that one up. We did some experimental work on some different things that maybe one day we'll get back to, and then I moved over here to work with the guys on Far Cry 4 as creative director as well.
Was it like DLC type stuff or new IP type
It's
stuff?
full on. I'll get fired for talking about stuff, but you know, the studio's always got things bubbling away, percolating in the background. People try different things, so you know, sometimes they pop up for a minute and then come back. Other times, you know, they get incorporated into bigger games, sometimes into franchises. So fingers crossed, we'll do another interview one day on that stuff. We were really in sync with Far Cry 3 when we were developing the game, and we were on tour with them when we did E3, you know, when we did Gamescom in Europe. So I often found myself in a booth standing next to Dan, or you know, standing next to Mark, and watching their stuff evolve at the same time as they were watching our stuff evolve. I was jealous of the freedom, like at the time, because AC3 was such a big project for the studio. You know, the Eye of Sauron was on us all the time. So I think there's ups and downs to that. It was good because when I joined the Far Cry team, I had not just a sense of how I'd enjoyed Far Cry 3 as a game, but I'd also seen the reaction of people change over the course of the demos. So I had a pretty clear perspective, I thought, on what popped for people. You know, when did the audience stop saying, oh, okay, it's a shooter, you know, it's open world, and when did they start saying, oh, wow, that's amazing, that's something that I really want to buy. And I always say you have a finite window when you join a team where you're still a consumer. You know, you have a month maybe where you can look at it as a consumer and say, I know you've rationalized this decision, but I don't know that you've thought it all the way through, or really doesn't make any sense to me, before you become part of the team, and then all your decisions make perfect sense and you can argue them.
So did you then lobby for the Far Cry 4 spot?
It sort of came up. I had a lot of discussions with Dan. It was sort of Dan was always saying, you know, in that booming voice he has, that you know there was an opportunity and it was going to be great, and he had lots and lots of plans. And he's a very convincing man. At a certain point, it just became inevitable, I think, that we were going to do it. So there's funny things in game development because you know we work on them for years. So a lot of it is not just the project but the people. You know, so you think to yourself, oh, you know, if I was brainstorming with those guys, or I was, you know, working 60-hour weeks with those guys, would it be exciting and fun, or would it be painful? And so I really did like the idea of working on a Far Cry game for many reasons, but especially for the people. It seemed like, you know, a place that I wouldn't mind spending a couple of years of my life.
So how does the scope of Far Cry 4 compare to when you stepped in on AC3?
I think the difference is that at that point in the AC franchise, it was time to do something radical. You know, we'd had a couple of games sort of spinning on that AC2 recipe, and so it was time to do something crazy and really push it. The beauty is that the recipe was established by the Far Cry 3 guys with this one. So while we have a huge amount of content that people are not going to expect, that we haven't unveiled, and there's lots of big surprises to come, there's more of that base that's still strong and still really healthy. I think the biggest lesson for me moving into Far Cry from AC3 is we're keeping a much tighter grip on the scope. You know what I mean? Where at a certain point, we want to have that time to polish the hell out of it. And we spoke on AC3 about it. And at that time, it still looked like we were going to get it. And then, you know, it was one of those finish lines that kept moving away from you. I think we're in a really good position on this one to give it a lot of love. The biggest learning has been less can be more if you really finish it, you know, 150, 200%. Again, in terms of lore or backstory, AC obviously is rich in it, and it's been a big focus of the teams that have worked on it. And that's a boon and a curse. You know, it's something that you can always lift from, you know, and evolve and work on. At the same time, it starts to constrict you more and more as you move forward. So you need to keep finding new avenues, and I think the guys have done a great job with Black Flag and, you know, and Unity as well, of finding those avenues to explore. Far Cry, we have much more space. But at the same time, I don't think we've yet tipped over into that sort of true unified franchise, you know? So I think we could do a bit more in that. Even though, yes, in the long term, it will start to be constricting, I think we could do more. I think we could do more to connect the games, to build a world that still allowed for freedom and expression in each individual game, but felt more like a cohesive whole. The advantage of having the consistency is that your fans become part of the club. You know, so you start to come into something and you have backstory in the back of your mind, and you don't want to make it so that people can't have fun if they don't know the secrets and the ins and the outs, but there's a joy in being a fan of something.
Could you ever see yourself going back to the Assassin's Creed franchise?
Yeah, I have a lot of ideas for AC. The AC teams these days, because we have the folding teams, there's always a discussion going on about where should the next game be set. There's so much opportunity in history that, yeah, one day, you never know. Never say never.
When Far Cry 3 was done, the creative director went off and made Child of Light. Do you have any interest in breaking off when Far Cry 4 is done and doing a smaller project like that? Is that kind of
I think that's one of those questions that could get me fired. I will do as Eve commands. No. I think that there's all kinds of opportunity, you know. The beauty of the little ones is there's less pressure to sell, there's less pressure to hit a really huge audience and a wide demographic, so you can be a little more esoteric, you know, you can make a more unusual game. So yes, there's definitely an interest in trying some smaller things, but I've been on the sort of mega game bandwagon for a lot of years now, so there's also massive pluses in that. You know, like we get to talk to you guys, we get to do reach millions and millions of people. And whenever I'm having a terrible day, I go home and I think, you know, what other job in the world could I have that X million people are going to go home and enjoy at some point? So there's magic in that. So you don't want to give it up, I think, at a certain point.